Revenge, a dish that's best served cold, they always say. I've always thought that was weird, and it still is. Revenge is hot and full of emotion and irrational thinking very often, and I think that's a far more apt description of what's going on right now. And there's that dynamic is at play both in the Israel-Hamas war and possibly now Israel-Hezbollah war, as well as in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And we're going to look at both of those today because there's a lot of things hanging in the balance and a lot of ramifications, especially for American national security, depending on which way these things go. We want to start off with the breaking news that's happening out of the Middle East. We've had, and I'll show you this in just a second, a comment by Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Hezbollah force in southern Lebanon. He was responding to some things that have happened in his country from this pager attack, so-called. We've been talking about that a lot. Certainly been on the news. We're on a couple of days in a row. Thousands of people were injured. Many were killed when pagers and then later cell phones, and I'm sorry, not cell phones, but walkie-talkies were suddenly exploded and harmed a lot of people. We're going to get to that a little bit more in a second, but that actually wasn't the beginning of the story, and this is almost certainly not the end of it as well. I want to take you back to August 25th, actually. We're going to get a running start into this and put Nasrallah's comments in context, put the pager event in context as well. You may recall that there was a big event, actually the biggest airstrike and then counter rocket strike from Israel into Hezbollah, and then from Hezbollah into Israel on August the 25th. That was at the time the biggest incursion that the two have had since the 2006 war, and certainly this current conflict here. But as the Prime Minister of Israel said himself, that wasn't going to be the end. Watch this.
After Israel and Hezbollah traded cross-border attacks early today, each side signaled there'd be no further escalation for now. Before dawn, about 100 Israeli warplanes struck more than 40 Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. Israelis said it thwarted an attack. Lebanese officials said 3 people were killed and 2 others hurt. A short time later, Hezbollah fired a barrage of missiles and drones toward Israel, hitting, the group said, a military intelligence site. An Israeli Navy officer was killed and 2 other service members wounded. At a cabinet meeting this morning, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the operation was a success.
What happened today is not the end of the story. Hezbollah tried to attack the state of Israel with rockets and drones early in the morning. We instructed the IDF to carry out a powerful preemptive strike to remove the threat.
It's kind of odd that he wants to say that was success, that they preempted the strike, but then hundreds of rockets and drones came across anyway. So not sure how successful it was. But the bigger thing of importance that he said there was this is not the end of the story. It was widely reported at the time that both sides said, all right, we're not going to escalate this any further. We preempted something. We detected a launch coming. We attacked it and destroyed it. They claimed this massive 1,000 launcher target list that they knocked out. Never had any actual proof of that. But the Hezbollah side said, yes, our response here, that is the end of the story. They actually did say that. But you saw Netanyahu said this is not the end of the story. Didn't get a lot of notice at the time, but it's certainly getting so now because it certainly appears we do know what the next thing was. And that was this pager strike, actually communications gear of many kinds that were, according to reports on 2 consecutive days, a near simultaneous explosion of all kinds of devices. Some reports are saying that there was a text message sent, and when people looked at their phone, seconds later, the thing went off, and many were in their pockets, etc. Lots of damage, little limbs blown off. It's just horrific. That happened to a lot, and of course, as you may have heard, this was not specifically targeted to military people because whoever planted these, explosives inside the devices, you can't be careful on what, because you don't have any idea where they're distributed to. And we have at least some children have been killed. Hospital workers have been killed. And it's really caused lots and lots of trouble, even for the civilian population. And certainly there's lots of calls already that this is a war crime itself. Others are going to have to look into that. But it certainly was not any kind of a precision strike. This was a big strike. Well, so now then the big question is, what was Hassan Nasrallah going to do about it? What can we expect Hezbollah to do as a result? Well, just a couple of hours ago, very recently, Nasrallah spoke for the first time on this and had some pretty strong language.
It is nothing but a massacre, and this is the word that we are going to adopt, massacre, to be added to the Israeli enemy's crimes and massacres perpetrated over decades since the creation of this cancerous entity in our region. It is an act of war against the people of Lebanon, Lebanon's sovereignty. It is a declaration of war. It is an act of war and can be characterized as such.
Now, the real question is going to be, what does he mean by an act of war? Is he going to make some sort of a military test? Is there going to be a big rocket barrage? That's uncertain, and that's part of the big problem here, because I think the idea that Hezbollah is going to attack Israel in terms of on the ground and come, sending troops in, I don't view as any possibility, not even low, but none. Because that would be suicide for the Hezbollah side. If they actually came out in the open, while they have lots of combat experience, they've actually had many of their fighters have been fighting elsewhere in Syria and from reports I've seen elsewhere, possibly even in the Africa continent. So they have lots of experience there, but it's in a guerrilla type operations and infantry type operations. It's not like they have armored vehicles that they can then go and attacking south, which Israel, of course, is the preeminent power in the region, and they do have those things. So if Hezbollah forces came out, they would literally be mowed down. So there's no possibility of that. But the issue is, what is Israel going to do? Because the defense minister Yoav Gallant said a couple of days ago that some things are changing on the ground for Israel.
I believe that we are at the start of a new phase in the war, and we must adapt. The central gravity is moving towards the north. This means that we are diverting forces, resources, and energy towards the north.
So the real question is Israel going to invade and attack Hezbollah into their territory? Now, for reasons I'm going to talk to you about in a second, this is a disastrous idea. If Israel thinks that they're going to get away with this and that they're going to succeed, gracious, I mean, they're in for another huge disappointment. Now, I've been saying literally since the beginning of this war on this channel that Netanyahu has his country pursuing a political objective, make his country safe with military means that cannot succeed. And he has proven, it's now shown, after we're closing in on, hard to imagine this, we're closing in on the 1 year mark of this war. And now then you see that the Gaza Strip is still an active combat zone. You may remember a couple of months back, 2 or 3 months, I think it was, certainly at the early of the summer, Netanyahu went out and said, we have to go first into Rafah and then all the way up to the southern border, because there is 4 more battalions and we got to go get them. And so then we'll be able to have victory. Well, he went into Rafah against our repeated requests not to. He did everything with tanks, with missiles, with bombs, aircraft strikes. I mean, everything you can imagine, and just devastated the area. People were having to move from one part to another to try and avoid some of this. Civilians continued to die in large numbers, of course. And what now? You never hear him talking about what happened to those 4 battalions after you went in there. Well, here's the truth of it. The people, the fighters, of course, just melted back into the population, or they're in even more tunnels that still haven't been discovered. And obviously, Israel is trying to find out where these tunnels are on a daily basis, an hourly basis practically. And they still launch all these airstrikes, but they cannot quell them. And the reason is obvious. If you keep killing all kinds of innocent people, the male surviving family members are certainly going to rise up in opposition to that. And even if you haven't had a family member killed, and at this point, there probably are hardly any families that haven't had losses of some sort. I mean, you have literally wiped out as Gary's shown on the map here, they've literally wiped out the ability to sustain life for any Palestinian, any of the 2+ million people who are living there. So, of course, they're going to have intense hatred towards Israel. And like any human being, if they're attacked, they're going to defend themselves. So however many actual Hamas fighters that you may have killed, the number is almost irrelevant because there's no shortage of other people who are going to pick up the fight. So, and now Israel's in the middle of it. So now they have struck. They have literally taken every tactical target that you can get across that war, and they've attacked and destroyed it. There's just nothing left but rubble. Now what do you do? Well, they're not sure. They don't know how to get out of it. He's gotten himself into a no-win situation, and all evidence appears, and I'm going to show you this in a minute in a little bit more detail, that Netanyahu's play right now is to expand the war because this one can't be won. He can't even come up with a good excuse to how he can say that it's successful. So he's going to do the worst thing he can do is expand the war in an attempt to draw the United States in. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad play in terms of whether it'll work or not, because it might. In fact, that's a big problem that I'll also show you in just a second. But all that'll do is get us sucked into it and create even more enemies, and now raise the prospect of a regional fight. And others who are on the sidelines at the moment may not stay on the sidelines for a lot longer if this thing expands beyond. Most pointedly, of course, would be Iran. So if Israel attacks into Hezbollah in the southern Lebanon, there's every reason to think that Iran would get involved. And again, I think that's probably Netanyahu's play. We'll see that in a second too. But what is the United States response to this? So you saw Yoav Gallant saying what he said. You've seen Netanyahu back in August saying what he said about this is not the end of the story. Now, here was the response by John Kirby following Yoav Gallant's comments. Tell me how much credibility you'd place in this.
We want to see the war end. And everything we've been doing since the beginning has been designed to prevent the conflict from escalating. We still believe, for instance, that there is a diplomatic path forward, that particularly up near Lebanon.
Oh, okay. Now, to me, that is one of the biggest shames and humiliations that I've seen in a long time. And that's saying a lot, because there's been a lot of it. When you see that everything we have tried to do, every red line we've tried to give Netanyahu, every comment that we keep making, whether it's President Biden, whether it's Vice President Kamala Harris and some of her campaign statements and some of her speeches, or Kirby here, we keep saying over and over, we want a two-state solution. We want a ceasefire. We want a negotiated settlement. We care about the Palestinian people. We keep saying all those, and Israel does whatever it wants. And just look at just recent history here. Go back to April when Israel broke every diplomatic norm you can imagine when they destroyed an Iranian embassy compound in Syria. Now, we should have condemned that. That should be, we say the rules-based order that we want to defend. And yet that's one of the most egregious violations, where a country used its military power to destroy an embassy compound in the capital of another country. And of course, we did nothing except for, actually, we didn't hardly say anything. We just kind of it was just whistling as we went by. Then there was in July, when Israel assassinated their senior negotiating partner for Hamas, while the U.S. was putting so much diplomatic capital in trying to reach a negotiated settlement with Hamas to bring this to an end. And you've shown it a bunch here. You've seen the Secretary of State Antony Blinken going around to all these places, making all these speeches, saying how, we've already agreed with Israel for this ceasefire. They've agreed to all these things, and it's all we need is for Hamas to say yes. So we need to get to yes. And then later they'll say, we need both of them to get to yes, because neither one of them. And then you see that Israel does nothing. They continue on. You've seen where the president of the United States said that we are setting a two-state solution as the primary objective here. And then we cut to another soundbite of Netanyahu saying, yeah, we're not going to do that. No, we're not going to do that. And by the way, when Blinken said the Israel side has agreed to this ceasefire, we just need to get Hamas, we had Netanyahu saying, no, we haven't agreed to it on Fox News, not even just in his own country. He said, no, there's no truth to that. We are not close to negotiated or even a ceasefire. Forget about a negotiated settlement. So everywhere you see the U.S. saying, here's our national interest, you see Israel putting a thumb in our face, and they're not going to do it. And now then here we are you have Kirby saying, we really don't want a war, but we don't take any action. We don't do anything. And let me show you a little bit about what's driving this. Gary, if you can throw up that one about the Litani River, that full screen image there with the map. I'm going to show you even more fidelity on this in a minute. But here you have on the bottom, of course, Israel and this kind of a convoluted border area there, the gray and then into the white. That is the Lebanese border. And this is some of the forget about the arrows. They're basically some things that happened in a previous conflict. But the point being that about 2/3 of the way up there, you'll see going from east to west, the Litani River. That's about 25 kilometers north of the Israeli border, and where a UN agreement that ended the 2006 war formally required the Hezbollah forces to move north of that river, which they haven't done. They are continuing to be south of that river. Well, now, Gary, put that other map up there. Here's the problem right here. In the upper left-hand corner, you see, again, Lebanon and Israel, and you see this big red area there. That is where on the Lebanese side of the border, they have evacuated all their civilians, hundreds of thousands of people probably. And then on the map on the right, you see about a 5-kilometer zone on the southern side of that border, on the Israeli side of that border, where there are also about 100,000 people in all those little villages you see there marked. Those are places where Israeli civilians have been forced out by the Israeli government to keep them safe. So the people who have been forced out of there are now nearly 11 months have not been able to stay at their homes. And they keep putting enormous political pressure on Netanyahu to take action, to do whatever it takes so that they can go home. That's primarily what they want. They don't care what the solution is to people. They just want to go to their homes, and they're putting lots of pressure on Netanyahu. Now, what he should do is to recognize that by doing what the U.S. is asking and having a ceasefire, that is the best way to stop the rockets coming in from the north, because that's what Hezbollah has said from the beginning, that they would stop their attacks into Israel as soon as the attacks of Israel stop into Hamas in the Gaza Strip. But he's not willing to do that. So he wants to basically have his cake and eat it too. And so now then he's thinking the best way to solve that is militarily. Now, let me show you an active map here. Let me pull this up. If you'll give me just 1 second. I'm going to show you a picture of Google Earth to kind of really drive home what's going on here. So here's Jerusalem and Israel right here. And then we'll see up north, just like that map I showed you a second ago. This is the border between Lebanon and Israel. And then the Litani River is about right here, if you can see a little closer. But let me show you something about this territory here. Israel, even thinking about going into this conflict, it's not suicide per se, but absurd in the highest order. They went in 2006 and had a limited incursion. They stayed for a while. They had some tactical successes, but then they realized they couldn't operationally do anything. What were they going to do? And then they came back to Israel after blowing a bunch of stuff up and killing people. They returned back to their side. Now, what possible difference do they think this was going to be now? But look, let me show you what this terrain looks like. Let me flip this over to 3D here. And when you zero in and zoom in on some of these areas, I mean, just look at this, how difficult this terrain is. You see, these are now mostly abandoned villages and cities, but these are very mountainous positions. Lots of places to hide, lots of places to get booby trapped. And by the way, that's one of the biggest problems that they had in the 2006 war, is that they had all different kinds of expectations, to where the Hezbollah side had prepared defensive positions, and they had mine fields, they had rocket propelled grenades, they had ambushes set up. I mean, this is 2006. I assure you that they are even much more better now, and because they have built much stronger defensive positions. And I'll just kind of give you an example of what something the Israelis might see. Let's say in this little these valleys right here, if Israel comes up this one valley here, like where this goes inside here, let me zoom in a little bit here. One of the things, and this did happen actually in some areas during the 2006 war, Israeli tanks might be coming up here, and then there would be anti-tank missile teams hiding up on the mountain here. So as soon as they cleared here, then they would hit them in the flank here, and then these guys would disappear back into areas where they knew where to go, etc. And then, of course, the areas, like you see how restricted the terrain is in this corner here of the road. If they get hit with anti-tank mines or so, now then you have all these tanks backed up on the road, and then a crew will pop up either under the brush or over the top of the ridge where it couldn't be seen, and now they're all sitting ducks. That also happened several times. Those are fundamental things. That's how wars are fought, and there's no reason to think that it would be any different, and certainly not any better now. Here's one of the bigger issues for the Hezbollah side, though. They also recognized some of their errors and shortnesses and weaknesses in the 2006 war. And so now then they have a massive rocket and missile force, much, much bigger than they had before. And if Israel attacks in, there is a very real possibility that they may pull large numbers of these more effective weapons and missiles out and fire deeper into Israel. And the Iron Dome that is billed on Western media as being this near impenetrable shield isn't. And we've had Professor Ted Posel of MIT on to explain exactly why that is and how it hasn't been the case. It's just been reported that way. But Israel should know that it's really not that way, and that they know that Hezbollah, while they can't attack with a ground force into Israel, they can dang sure shoot lots of rockets and missiles, and they can saturate portions of the Iron Dome so that there's not enough interceptor missiles to take it out. And once those interceptors are burned up, especially the ones that are loaded up, they're helpless, they're defenseless. And so the next barrage of rockets or missiles that come in there have nothing to interfere, and they'll all hit their targets. This could be a horrible thing for the Israeli side. And I'm talking about, not even talking about whether the army would succeed going into that area or not. They almost certainly would not, because they don't have a big enough army, the Israeli side does, to conquer 25 kilometers of all of that territory. They simply don't have it. You see that they're pushed almost to the limit with what they got to sustain this Gaza Strip operation here. And it's relatively small, and they've been able to make that into bite-sized pieces. And Hamas, other than their initial barrage of bad rockets and incorrect or inaccurate rockets with low payloads, they burned those up months ago. Hezbollah has not burned up theirs. They have a lot of them to use, and they have a very potent ground force that's probably better than it was in 2006 in many of your capacities. So if Israel launches this war, if they want to go after, you can't even hardly call this revenge. If anything, you can see where the Hezbollah side, in revenge for the pager attack, may do something, but I doubt that they would initiate the war, but they may. I can't really talk about it. Nasrallah has shown himself to be very pragmatic, also very risk averse. And he doesn't want it to, cause unnecessary harm to himself, but he also cannot let something like this go when it was literally spread throughout the country that a lot of his forces and a lot of the civilians in his country were hit. So there is a likelihood that something is going to come. And by the way, all of this comes on the heels of we're still waiting to find out what Iran is going to do for the the July 31st assassination of Hania in Tehran. So we're still waiting for that too. So what do you think the chances are if Israel attacks into southern Lebanon, that Iran will do nothing? Well, the likelihood is that they'll join forces with their number one proxy force in the whole region, in the Hezbollah. So then you have the prospect for a major escalation in a region-wide war. Now, what do you think the United States is going to do? Well, we've shown you many clips several times where, whether it's Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Secretary of Defense Austin, Jake Sullivan, I think even Kamala Harris on a few occasions, has all said, yes, if anything happens, if Iran does anything to Israel, we are going to defend them like we did last time, is what they said a lot. They're referring to the April incursion, where U.S. Air Forces went to the defense of Israel. And when Iran retaliated for the embassy bombing, the United States intercepted a great many of the drones, I think 70 of them or something like that. So we directly engaged with them. Now, would we also fight a war? Would we, like, not just intercept targets, but strike targets in Iran and or Hezbollah? The implication being that we are, but we don't know. Here's the problem with that. You could get us sucked into a war that we don't have the capacity to fight. We don't have the ammunition. We don't have the interceptor missiles for ourselves. You just saw, we had earlier today and yesterday, we showed you a clip of Jake Sullivan, who admitted in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war, we don't have enough ammunition to give them. We don't have it. We're having to take interceptor missiles from all around the world where places we were supposed to give them, and instead we're sending them here. What happens if we need them? What happens if we get sucked into a war and now we've got to defend ourselves with these rockets? You think we're going to have anything to give to Ukraine, or even enough for us and Israel? You can see this is absurd. There is no way on God's earth we need to be fighting this war here. We need to be bringing this thing to an end, and we need to finally start using our leverage and saying, hey, whatever happened on 10/7, great, I get it. You were attacked viciously. Hundreds of civilians were killed. It was right for you to respond and retaliate for what happened here. But to suck us into a war and to carry it way beyond any kind of retaliation into now then just a systematic destruction of the way of life for an entire people group. And now then you're talking about escalating it to north of the border and possibly even to Iran. Hell no. That's what we should be saying. We should be privately telling Netanyahu, dude, we're done. We're done. Election or no, the Israeli lobby with their money or no, don't care. Nothing is worse than getting sucked into a war for getting elected into a government position. So if you want to win the presidential election, Kamala Harris, then the last thing you want is to get sucked into a war, because it's not going to be a quick one. This is not something that's going to be done in a Desert Storm kind of 100-hour kind of deal, or even the 1 month in the Operation Iraqi Freedom. This is not going to be going that fast. If you need any convincing, look at the Houthis. After around a decade of time with the Saudi Arabians, with our help, trying to eradicate them, they never succeeded. And now since we joined the fray in the Red Sea, we still have not quelled them. We still have not shut them down. No matter how many missiles and engagements we fought, we still haven't cowed them. And you think now that we're going to be able to continue to help Ukraine against Russia and then enter into a war against Hezbollah with Israel and or Iran? I mean, you can see that it's absurd. We can't do it. So why are we even playing around the edges with it, folks? If Israel wants to draw themselves and get themselves into a war, it would be foolish, but that's their prerogative. That's Netanyahu's prerogative. He can make bad decisions for his country. He can't make bad decisions for our country. And it is like in the 11th hour and 59 minutes maybe, because with this strike, with this pager strike here, the likelihood is that they would time that to where they were about ready to launch their ground offensive, because by doing these kinds of things and hitting all their communications gear, now then Hezbollah is badly depleted for knowing how to communicate around areas that's going to be successful. So if Israel attacks, it's going to be a lot harder for them to make initial coordination and supporting fires and all that sort of thing, because most of their communications gear has been compromised. So it could be coming really soon. So we're in the late hour here, and we better take action really quick if we don't want to get into a lot of trouble that we may not be able to get ourselves out of. That's in the Middle East. If that's all there was, we're in a real world of hurt, but it's not. There's also an issue of revenge in the Russia-Ukraine war. So now let's take a look at that situation here. Now, we had last Friday, Vladimir Putin really kind of shocked a lot of people when he had what seemed to be an impromptu interview outside the Kremlin, oddly enough. But he said something that was very much out of the ordinary.
Это решение будет принято. Это будет означать не что иное, как прямое участие стран НАТО, Соединенных Штатов, европейских стран в войне на Украине. Это их прямое участие. И это уже, конечно, существенным образом меняет саму суть, саму природу конфликта. Это будет означать, что страны НАТО, США, европейские страны воюют с Россией. А если это так, то, имея в виду изменение самой сути этого конфликта, мы будем принимать соответствующие решения, исходя из тех угроз, которые нам будут создавать.
So that was a clear shot across the bow. Now, as you've been noticing by watching many of our shows in the past, certainly go on our channel and look at some of the recent things we published. There are a lot of people in the United States, in the West, that don't believe that at all. They don't believe a word of him. It's just bluster. He's not gonna. He doesn't mean it. He's certainly not going to go to war with NATO when he can't even handle Ukraine. That's the belief. So don't listen to anything he says there. It's just a weak attempt to try to stop people from using long-range weapons. We'll see how that's going to work out there. Now, after he said that, then 2 nights ago, there was a massive strike very deep in Russia, northwest of Moscow, hundreds of kilometers away from the Ukraine-Russian border. The Ukraine side was successful in getting its own long-range drones. Apparently, a whole swarm of about 100 of them attacked a bomb facility and a storage depot that contained apparently large numbers of missiles, rockets, artillery pieces, other kinds of ammunition in this massive explosion in the Tver region. Gary, if you can bring up some of that stuff, that video there, because this left a big impression on the Russians, of course, because they see not only has their land been attacked in the Kursk area physically, but now then they're starting to have deeper strikes here. We've also seen recently how apartment buildings in high-rise apartment buildings in Saratov have been struck by a drone. Apartment building in Moscow has been struck by drones. And then now this one here. And Putin is coming under a lot of pressure from his people, not saying, why are you conducting this war? Stop. But the exact opposite. They're saying, why are you holding yourself back? Just imagine seeing an explosion like the one that Gary's showing on the screen right here in your country. And you're going to be furious with your leader if he doesn't do something about it. You're not going to be mad at him for, gosh, you brought this war on us, because we see the rally around the flag thing. It certainly was the case in the United States on 9/11. Did we say, gosh, President Bush, what's wrong with you for messing up with those darn Arabs in the Middle East? You should pull out. Of course not. It was the exact opposite. And if anybody is stupid enough to think that somehow the Russians are different than that and they're going to respond differently than that, then you need to go see a therapist, because that is not the case right now. So the question is going to be, what is Russia going to do? What kind of response might they take here? Now, Lavrov gave us, the foreign minister Lavrov gave us a bit of a warning of what may come, and what the Russian side are thinking about when he said this.
Запад не хочет избежать эскалации. Запад, по-русски говоря, нарывается. Очень важно понимать, что у нас есть своя доктрина, в том числе доктрина использования ядерного оружия, которая, кстати, сейчас уточняется, и о которой американским деятелям очень хорошо известно. И мы сейчас еще раз подтверждаем, что игра с огнем, а они, как дети малые, со спичками балуются, это очень опасная штука для взрослых дяденек и тетенек, которым доверено ядерное оружие в той или иной западной стране.
Okay, now again, most Western commentators dismiss that as well, just the same as what Putin said. He's just echoing what Putin said. He's just more empty rhetoric. They're not going to do any of that. But then you got to look at actions, and that's what Lavrov said. And then subsequent to that, we've seen that they have a very large nuclear submarine, nuclear-powered, nuclear weapons submarine, capable submarine, is patrolling in the Pacific. And so you see that they've assessed that the most powerful weapons they have in their Pacific fleet is now rolling around there. Now, this is on top of a huge naval exercise that has been going on between Russia and China in the Sea of Japan area, so not far from the Pacific as well. And this was a major one, the biggest one they've had since the Soviet era. And it's no small issue here. And this was a total of 400 ships, submarines, and other support vessels were part of this. 90,000 people. So again, not a small thing. Operating in waters not far from the U.S. We had a show on yesterday where we showed you one of the comments that was asked by General Ryder that says, hey, there's been a lot of Russia and Chinese activities around the Aleutian Islands, around the Alaska Islands, more so than we've seen in a long time. Should we be worried about this? Nah, don't worry about this. You just need to talk to them about it. Don't even worry about it. So you see actions all over the place that they're conducting more patrols. They haven't violated our airspace, but they've come very close to it. So now then they have large number of war vessels in the area around many of the American bases that we have in that area. And you see that they're sending specifically nuclear submarines with nuclear capable ships that are capable of firing nuclear weapons into the area here. So if you think it's just saber rattling, and it certainly could be, that doesn't prove anything that's not. But to say that for sure it's not anything serious and they're not ever going to do it is playing Russian roulette, forgive the pun. You're playing with your life by saying, no, we can just keep on doing anything. Now, we don't know what Putin's going to do right now because he was talking about long-range missiles that were provided specifically by the West. And we now know from both sides reporting that this one in the Tver region was actually drone strikes. Now, it was a very deep in Russia, and it was a big issue because that's definitely going to hurt Russia because there was no telling how many missiles, Iskanders, hypersonic missiles, probably, certainly lots of artillery ammunition. An explosion of that size has to have a lot of firepower. So no matter what, they're gonna feel the sting of that one. But of course, Russia is this massive country, and they don't have all their stuff in one place, and they still have stuff coming in from North Korea and from Iran as well. So that's not going to stop their war machine. It's just going to be a one-time deal. The question is, what is Russia going to do? Now, there have been reports already that there has evidence that Russia is getting ready for another major strike against Ukraine. So in the near term, there's a distinct possibility that Russia strikes targets possibly different than they have in the past. Now, they've been going for months now against the energy infrastructure, against weapons depots, train stations, lots of things needed to move troops around, et cetera, bridges, military targets. Now, what they have avoided so far is hitting any of even the war ministries or so in Kiev. They've struck some targets in Kiev, but even that has primarily been military targets. But they haven't gone after the high profile, where the foreign ministry is, where their Ministry of Defense is, where the presidential compound. They haven't gone after those, not because they can't, because they've chosen not to. But with something like this, it's entirely possible that they're going to spread it out further. But as I've been talking to you about, that's level one concern. The much bigger concern is that Russia may be saying, we're just ready to end this war. And they've actually said it's as such. And we'll see whether people believe them or not. But I want to show you kind of what is possible here and what they may be looking at. And that, there we go. And that is in some of the northern areas. I've talked to you a little bit about this in the past, but just so you see, this is the Kursk area. This is where lots of fighting is going on, and certainly lots of continued losses by the Ukraine side in the Kupiansk area up around here, in the Toretsk area, of course, the Pokrovsk is the big one. That's where they're moving the furthest, but even down in the Vuhledar area, and lots of operations and action down here in the very south that hasn't gotten a lot of notice yet, but the Russian side is doing lots of things that make it look like they may be getting ready to do something big down here where they haven't in quite a long time. They actually have probably more troops down here than anywhere else on the border here, and they haven't hardly even made any moves, which of course would put Zaporizhia and possibly even Odessa in the crosshairs. So that's a risk that they have to have. But up here, I think the biggest vulnerability is going to be Kiev, because there has been lots of reports, and you can see some of it even here, where there are unknown number of Russian units in the north here. Now, this is Belarus, but there are also Russian units, many around here. They're certainly in many of the Smolensk, the Bryansk, and in the Kursk Oblast, lots of troops being there. The exact numbers are unknown, but according to some reports by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and Intelligence Services earlier this summer, somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 troops of Russian troops are in this area. Not those in combat, not those that are fighting here, but that are out of combat and potentially be used for others. Now, as I look at the situation here, I'm going to cover this in more detail probably in a week or so, but to kind of give you a preview and why this should be so alarming for both the Ukraine and the U.S. side, is that in the event that Russia chose to have what they call a big arrow movement, where they had large number of the troops, and then they went back after Kiev again. Now, on the one hand, a lot of people would say, well, they tried to take Kiev before and they failed. Well, they didn't really try to take it. They tried a demonstration because they didn't have, I think the total number of troops they had was 50, 60,000 total that they moved into around the Kiev area when they first went down here. And I think based on what they did and the number of troops they had, that the primary purpose was to scare Zelensky into leaving, to abandoning it, and seeking negotiated settlement. But and that's why I say that it was a big strategic error on the Russians' part at the beginning, because if they only had a plan A, and if that was with Zelensky leaving, but if Zelensky stayed and fought, then they were not equipped and outfitted for a plan B, which was now you have to fight for the place, and they couldn't do it. They didn't have enough troops. They didn't have anywhere near enough troops. I think Kiev is maybe a couple million, so it's a huge city, and you certainly aren't going to take that with 40,000 people. Well, now then, you can see a lot of the number of troop designations. So there are some Ukrainian troops that are defending here. But if Russia comes in with a couple 200,000 troops into this area, now they will have a shot at here. And here's the big problem. Zooming back out again here. If Ukraine has to defend its capital, whatever the number of troops is here, they don't have enough, not even near enough for a concerted like 200,000 troop assault onto the capital city. They would have to withdraw troops from here and really all along the front here. But as I just told you, Russians have, again, according to the Ukraine sources, somewhere around 600,000 troops along this line here. Now, if you suddenly take out tens of thousands of these troops to go back and defend the capital, what do you think is going to happen to the force dispositions here? Of course, this would have a serious problem of collapsing. This would go away, and they would have to abandon that right away. They would have to stop anything and immediately rush all these troops back to the capital. So even if you want to say, well, Russia's just not good enough, they can't make this kind of a move. If they simply sent troops, even if they weren't that well trained, and by all accounts, many of them are, but just the fact of all that number of troops going to your capital where you presently don't have enough troops to defend, you don't have a strategic reserve. They don't have 150, 200,000 Ukrainians to defend somewhere else. I mean, they would also certainly pull any of these back here, anything that's not in combat. They would throw everything they have, but they would have to pull because some of their most capable combat forces are currently along the line of contact, of course. I mean, why wouldn't they be? But you see, they just don't have enough forces to do everything. So they would have to rob Peter to pay Paul in a big way, and they simply don't have it. So if they protect their capital city here, then they're going to lose here. So I don't know for sure what Russia's going to do, but I can tell you there is a tremendous vulnerability, and it's going to remain to be seen what they end up doing. But we need to know that this is a perilous time right now for the United States foreign policy and our national security in both the Middle East and in Europe here. And man, if we had Ambassador Chaz Freeman on earlier today talking about the need for diplomacy, and I'm telling you, if there was ever in our history a need for diplomacy, maybe the only other time for diplomacy that was bigger was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's probably the biggest, because that was literally an existential fight. But other than that, and this may be even more than World War I or World War II, because this is stuff where our troops are actually around the world right now, and our interests are at risk if things go sideways. And especially because, like 1962, this could go nuclear in the north, in the Russia-Ukraine war, if things go sideways there. And there's a very real possibility that they're thinking along those terms. And I assure you, we don't want to find out exactly how serious Vladimir Putin is. And it is absurd to the highest order for us to even want to find out. But to assume that Russia will never attack any NATO force, to assume that they would never use nuclear weapons because they, quote, know what would happen. I think the bigger claim is that we don't know what would happen if that took place. And the assumption, which you've seen, Hodges make on our show, that there would be this enormous, destructive response, automatic response from the West, or that John Bolton actually a couple of days ago we showed you where he said that, it would be signing his death warrant. Putin would be signing his death warrant if that ever happened. Oblivious was Bolton to the fact that if that happened, if you took out the capital of Russia and Vladimir Putin, then you've just signed the death warrant of Washington, D.C., of London, of Paris, who knows what else. You can't take that out without concurrently getting all of us killed. And that is why I'm so adamant when I'm telling you, this is not some kind of far-fetched sort of situation here. If you start going down this road here, you can see one action leads to another, which is how we got to World War I. Nobody wanted to fight World War I when it happened, but because of a series of bad diplomacy and bad actions that had concurrent effects, and people saw, oh, well, he's doing something, I better mobilize, I better move, and then all of a sudden everybody's at war that didn't even want to be. That same thing could happen here all too easily. And for us to even move up on the edge of it and try to find out where the real red line is could be suicidal. And it is time to withdraw from it. And we'll talk more about that next week. But it's important that you understand there's a lot of things going on right now. And you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep you abreast of all the latest currents. But that's all we have for you today. And we will see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. And also to reminder one more time that we're on podcast now. We have Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, just about anywhere you find your podcast. Type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you will be seen right to us, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you.